Sonic the Hedgehog is a 3D platformer developed by Sonic Team and released for the Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3 in 2006, as the game shares the same name as the 1991 game and was released in 2006. The game has taken on the moniker Sonic 06, which is how I'll refer to the game in this video. Starting with Sonic Adventure on the Dreamcast in 1998, Sonic Team struggled to keep the blue blur relevant during the 6th generation of video game consoles. While Sonic Adventure was highly regarded upon release, and Sonic Adventure 2 even more so, Sonic Heroes and Shadow the Hedgehog received far less critical acclaim. With the new generation of video game consoles and Sonic's 15-year anniversary being celebrated in 2006, it seemed Sega wanted to return Sonic to his adventure glory days and rely less on team and gun gimmicks, seeming to mark declining interest in the series. The result is another adventure-styled game. Sonic 06 features Hub Worlds, where the player will need to seek out the next action stage, upgrades giving characters new abilities needed to progress, non-playable characters offering additional backstory and things to do, gorgeous CGI cutscenes rivaling some of the best work of the time, as well as an intricate plot spanning past, present, and future, giving real weight to the adventure the player is about to embark. Also returning are multiple episodes with 3 different characters, each with their own abilities and skill sets, and like Sonic Adventure, playing through each episode will slowly reveal new plot elements tying the adventure together before the player reaches the final story. Combine all of these elements together with high-definition graphics and surround sound, and Sonic 06 had all of the ingredients needed to finally satisfy Sonic fans begging for Sonic Adventure 3. Of course, everyone knows things didn't quite pan out for Sonic the Hedgehog. The game was universally panned by critics, and many fans of the series still declare it the lowest point in the history of the franchise. So, is Sonic the Hedgehog 2006 really as bad as they say, or has history gotten it wrong? Let's take a look. The story of Sonic 06 spans 3 different time periods. First is the present, next is 10 years ago in the past, and finally there is 200 years into the future. In the future, a hedgehog named Silver, along with Sonic Rush's Blaze the Cat, lament on the poor state of the world and the presence of the flames of disaster known as Iblis, always wreaking havoc in their world. After a skirmish, a creature named Mephiles appears to offer guidance in resolving this dilemma. He advises Silver to travel to the past to eliminate the individual who awakened Iblis, referred to as the Iblis Trigger. The Iblis Trigger is a familiar-looking blue hedgehog. Shadow's episode begins with Shadow rescuing Rouge the Bat from one of Eggman's compounds. Rouge seems to have stolen a statue or idol from the compound, and the two then race off to the castle of Soliana. From here, Eggman catches up with Rouge, and it is revealed an accident occurred at the castle 10 years ago, and it has since been abandoned. And of course, Eggman wants the Scepter of Darkness back. Calamity ensues, and the scepter eventually falls to the ground and breaks open. The darkness then emerges from Shadow's shadow and announces himself as Mephiles the Dark, the same creature seen 200 years in the future. Then Mephiles transports Shadow and Rouge to said future. Finally, we have Sonic's episode, which occurs first in the game. Here we see a princess with a torch experiencing a vision where Iblis emerges in dramatic fashion. After snapping out of this vision, she finishes the ritual celebrating the sun god of Soliana, Solaris. The party is promptly crashed by Eggman. He announces he wants to obtain the secret of the flames of disaster from the princess, along with the Chaos Emerald she wears around her neck. Right on cue, Sonic appears ready to save the day, prompting Elise to have a flashback of Silver before Sonic starts beating down Eggman's robot army. The fireworks and explosion catch the attention of Silver, who has found his Iblis Trigger, while Sonic rescues Elise. This is only temporary though, as Eggman snatches the princess a few moments later. Between the 3 episodes, one should gather Eggman wants the Scepter of Darkness from Shadow's episode and the Flames of Disaster in Silver's episode for some dastardly scheme. Moving on, let's get to the gameplay. The player is tasked with reaching a goal ring at the end of the action stages. Sonic's moveset should be familiar for fans of the two adventure games. Sonic races along linear stages, homing off enemies, bouncing off springs, speeding over dash pads, and collecting rings, with plenty of scripted events like loop-de-loops offering spectacle along the way. Shadow's gameplay follows suit with a similar set of moves and familiar gameplay. However, he is given a few new moves. First is a projectile attack called Chaos Spear. However, more interesting is his Chaos Boost. After defeating enough enemies, the meter on the lower right will fill up. Pressing the right trigger will enable a Chaos Boost. In this boosted mode, Shadow's normal attacks do more damage, he can warp from enemy to enemy, and delivers more powerful Chaos Spears. Once the meter runs out, he returns to his normal form. Silver, on the other hand, has telekinetic powers. These powers can be used to catch projectiles and launch them back at enemies, grab cars or crates and break down walls, or be used as a glorified switch in designated areas to reveal platforms. Silver can also use his power on himself, giving him the ability to hover until the meter on the lower right runs out. Thankfully, all 3 episodes feature normal platforming gameplay. There is no treasure hunting, no shooting mechs, and no fishing. With 3 characters featuring unique gameplay mechanics and a grand story spanning 210 years, Sonic the Hedgehog 2006 lays the groundwork for an epic adventure, and the traditional gameplay seems to kick off the 7th generation of gaming on the right foot. Unfortunately, while the story and gameplay premise of Sonic 06 are sound enough, the adventure falls apart almost immediately. The player is dropped into a massive hub world and cannot simply progress to the first stage. The first 10 minutes with this game are laughably bad. A player will naturally move forward and see Tails in the distance. Once close enough, there is a loading screen. Tails yammers on about something, and then there is another loading screen. The player then needs to talk to a shoemaker to gain the custom shoes necessary for progression, which prompts a loading screen. After Robert explains the mission, there is a loading screen, and this town mission mercifully begins. I guess this is supposed to familiarize the player with the basic controls without resorting to a tutorial. However, running through these rings sucks. Most gamers will notice something feels off with the jumping right away. It turns out the player cannot control Sonic's inertia. Whatever speed Sonic is traveling once the jump button is pressed is the speed Sonic will retain until landing. This means if jumping from a standstill, Sonic will land where he started. Same goes for full speed jumps. Letting off the joystick does not slow Sonic's forward progress. I don't even know what is going on with the spring, but trying to maneuver midair is a nightmare. If one completes this mandatory town mission in the time allotted, there is another loading screen. Robert then gives Sonic the custom shoes, and there is another loading screen. The custom shoes give the player access to upgrades, which must be purchased in the store. In this case, the light chip gives access to the light dash needed to reach the first action stage. One just needs to make sure Sonic is facing the exact right direction, as the light dash remains pretty wonky. Just to recap, from the opening segment to the beginning of the first level, Wave Ocean, 12 minutes have elapsed, and this is on my second playthrough, so I knew what to do, and with Sonic 06 installed on a hard drive, reducing load times. For those reviewing the game in 2006 before installing discs was added to the system, and prior to internet guides, this 12 minutes was probably a lot more. Anyway, Wave Ocean is the typical first Sonic level. The grass is green, the sky is blue, and everything seems alright. Sort of. For some reason, Sonic falls on his ass when running into things, which kills the momentum. Sonic 06 also pulls a bait and switch just 2 minutes in. Inexplicably, the game switches to Tails for a while. Sadly, playing as Tails isn't much fun. Rather than use his tail to attack, he stops in place and throws a ring bomb. So, though. Less than 3 minutes into the first level, Sonic stops when running into a fence, and Tails stops to attack enemies. Oh yeah, the inertia issue Sonic experienced in the first town mission, it applies to Tails as well, making landing on small platforms extremely clumsy. After Tails finds a switch, there is a loading screen, and then a super speed section begins. Here, Sonic is running at Mach speed, and all the player can do is steer left and right or jump. Now, as this footage is from my second playthrough, I avoided jumping at all costs. When in the air, the player cannot alter Sonic's trajectory left and right, making jumping a risky proposition, but I'll get into that later on. Now, I'm not going to go into each and every level or town mission like this. I just want to demonstrate how painful it is to begin Sonic's campaign. Between the lame town mission, bad jumping controls, load screens, secondary characters, and sections where the player must avoid jumping, Sonic 06 offers a lousy first impression. Sadly, things don't really improve from here. On the first boss fight, the camera doesn't face the boss. Normally, in an arena-style boss fight, the camera will automatically move around, keeping both the character and the boss in view, giving the player the information needed for the task at hand. Sadly, the player will have to constantly adjust the camera manually to pinpoint the boss's location. To be fair, some bosses don't have this problem. The camera moves around, keeping both the character and the boss in view as one would expect. Other times, the player has to fight just to find the darn boss. Also returning are character battles. Silver catches up with the Iblis trigger and a character battle ensues. Like many bosses, the camera isn't dynamic and the player needs to constantly adjust manually, or just guess as to where the opponent might be. In this battle, where the player controls Silver and needs to attack Shadow, for example, I stopped trying to adjust the camera. Instead, I just hoped Shadow was behind, turned Silver around, and blindly threw objects and hoped for a hit. Hardly an engaging battle. I also stated Sonic 06 forgoes alternate gameplay types and instead sticks to platforming, but this isn't entirely true. Sonic has two boarding sections, for example, first on snow, then on fallen buildings. In both cases, the controls are not very good. The snowboard will seemingly stop for no reason, and the controls still baffle me. At times, it feels like the controls work in relation to the camera, and other times it feels like tank controls, where up is forward. Maybe neither of these is correct, but the boarding controls are not intuitive, and the player can expect to stop for no reason and struggle to maneuver in a desired direction. Shadow has a variety of vehicle segments, sort of like he did in Shadow the Hedgehog. The glider is okay, I guess, though there is no option to invert the y-axis, causing the controls to be opposite of most flying games of the time. Even after 2 playthroughs, I couldn't retrain my muscle memory, and my flying ends up looking very sloppy. The buggy and the hovercraft feature more traditional controls. Honestly, neither of these offended me in the least. The controls are not as tight as a dedicated vehicle game, but the steering is predictable and everything is responsive enough. I can't say the same for the bike. It actually reminds me of the dreadful checkered flag for the Atari Jaguar. What it feels like is the steering accelerates the longer the direction is pressed. This makes it very difficult to make slight adjustments as the bike wants to veer left or right wildly. This control style makes it difficult to perform the precision jumps necessary in this bike section. Like Sonic with Tails, Shadow has a sidekick too. Rouge the Bat is not only in the cutscenes but has playable segments. She controls like Knuckles, who makes a brief playable appearance and can glide in addition to climb walls. Unfortunately, the programming is pretty shoddy, and both characters will get stuck to walls. The levels are not really built with gliding in mind either, resulting in areas like Tropical Jungle feeling like a waste of time. However, the fun doesn't stop here. Omega returns with some shooting segments, Amy is back with her hammer and a new invincibility maneuver, and finally, Blaze the Cat is playable. Blaze is probably the most interesting of the bunch, mostly because she is the least different. She has a double jump and can home in on enemies, and she fits right in with the level structure created for the main characters. Still, I don't quite understand understand why Sonic Team decided to cram 9 playable characters into the game, considering a main criticism of the adventure titles was the reduced quality provided for secondary characters. The pain doesn't end with the endless supply of characters though. Sonic's super speed sections introduced in Wave Ocean continue throughout his episode. Without question, these were the biggest source of depleting lives. As noted, jumps cannot be adjusted mid-air, meaning corrections can't be made to stay on course. Worse is how Sonic is damaged by everything, even crates which Sonic can normally smash through without incident. Once damaged, Sonic becomes unresponsive for a few moments. Oftentimes, once the player regains control, they are ringless and a new obstacle is immediately presented which cannot be avoided, resulting in death. To be fair, there are plenty of extra lives in these segments, but they can only be obtained once. The player has to memorize every jump and hazard in order to be successful, which means trial and error. And if you're going to include trial and error as a form of difficulty, an endless supply of lives should be offered. Instead, the player is kicked back to the title screen after a game over and must restart the level from scratch. If there were cutscenes or town missions between stages, the player is going to have to redo those as well. The player can save anywhere on the hub world, but the only time I noticed this actually working as intended was after the intelligence, courage, and love tests prior to the Kingdom Valley action stage. Perhaps this save works in other situations as well, but this is the only instance I could find. The town missions also mostly suck. These are usually combat focused and feel like giant wastes of time. Sometimes these are disguised as escort missions, but I never failed one because the NPC died. Instead, I failed them because there are occasionally ridiculous stipulations, like 0 rings. Yeah, fun. I should also note the hub worlds are incredibly tedious. For one, they are massive. Second, they are confusing. To my eyes, everything basically looks the same. There are few landmarks standing out, and I really never had a sense of where I was. Other than 3 large bell towers and the mountains in the background, I found myself wandering through these, wondering where the next stage or mission was. Between the awkward jumping, frequent loading screens, 9 different characters, clumsy vehicles, getting stuck to walls, super speed sections, saving deficiencies, lame town missions, and giant hub worlds, Sonic 06 contains a plethora of frustrating moments, and the first playthrough of this one is bound to be painful for just about everyone. Repeat playthroughs are naturally far less problematic. One thing I noticed is how the Shadow and Silver campaigns are far less tedious. Sonic has 7 mandatory town missions, including the miserable mission where Sonic has no rings, the one where he has to find the captain, or wander about Soliana trying to find 3 bells. Shadow has just 2 town missions, making this campaign an entire hour shorter. Silver has 7 mandatory missions as well, but none cross the line into tedious territory like Sonic. Shadow and Silver also lack the super speed section Sonic has. This means while playing through both Shadow and Silver, I never experienced a game over. Instead, most of the time is spent soaking in the story and racing through levels, and less time is spent fumbling through hub worlds and completing lame town missions. The visuals are also pleasing. Level geometry and texture quality are noticeably superior to the previous 3D games. The character models have also received a noticeable boost in polygon count, looking much smoother and less choppy. With this comes better animation cycles, with less clipping or goofy moonwalking. Best of all, none of the characters contain the strange sheen introduced on the GameCube. Instead, the matte finishes help the characters feel more cartoonish and less plasticky. I also like the subtle motion blur effects, aiding in the sensation of speed. Shadows are noticeably improved as well, and I like how Sonic's quills cast shadows on his other quills. The graphic quality isn't nearly as good as the next game in the series, Sonic Unleashed, but other than some frame rate inconsistencies, Sonic 06 is a decent looking game doing a nice job presenting plush worlds to race around. Perhaps the best update comes in the cutscenes. The developers actually move the camera to help scenes feel more dynamic and interesting. Secondary characters also do things instead of stay in place, stationary. I love how Knuckles falls on his head here and spends the entire scene tending to his bruise. There are little moments too, like Tails waving frantically at Elise. While I'm not going to say the story is good, the presentation is more cinematic than ever before. Another highlight are Eggman's boss creations. Some of these are seriously slick looking, like the Hound of Hades. Every single joint is masterfully animated, and watching it roam around the arena is a visual treat. The dragon reptile is equally impressive, with smooth wing motions. I won't say all of Eggman's creations are great, but I do appreciate how the designers looked back to ancient mythology for inspiration. I also can't believe I'm saying this, but there are some charming moments in Sonic 06 as well. Knuckles fumbles around with this card, adding to his reputation established way back in Sonic 3. I also love when Shadow smashes through this train and Eggman notes, "Wouldn't the door have been easier?" There's also a cutscene where Eggman's glasses offer him some Iron Man-like capabilities, which is pretty rad. Now, I'm not saying Sonic 06 is a charming title by any stretch, but there are a few moments where it isn't all doom and gloom, and characters are briefly likable. Then, of course, there is the soundtrack. Sonic Adventure set the bar pretty high for the series, with a wonderfully diverse arrangement of music spanning a variety of different genres. Despite the variety, the quality never faltered, delivering quality pieces with each passing level. Sonic Adventure 2 and Shadow the Hedgehog were a noticeable downgrade, with an over-reliance on rock and many compositions lacking depth, making them completely forgettable. Sonic Heroes was pretty good as well, and even writing this script I can instantly recall Casino Park. Sonic 06 does a brilliant job capturing some of the magic from the Adventure and Heroes soundtracks. Wave Ocean fuses together lazy lounge music with island-style drums and simple string notes to perfectly encapsulate the feeling of being at the beach. Dusty Desert has traditional Arabian Nights instruments one would expect from the Middle East, with some sort of horned instrument almost acting as the vocals. It's haunting and captures the feeling of being in a desolate place. White Acropolis features something along the lines of club music, which matches the late-night setting. Crisis City continues the fusion trend with violin strings playing over some more techno-styled music. The fast beat captures the pace of the on-screen action as Sonic races along crumbling buildings, while the violin strings give a sense of hopelessness as the world crumbles around the heroes. Of course, the composers didn't abandon rock, and the rock music in Flame Core is absolutely amazing. The electric guitar strums sound sensational, and the energy fits perfectly with the amount of energy housed within the volcano. Tropical Jungle is equally impressive with its instrument selection. Prominent through this high-energy piece are steel drum notes, creating a sound unlike anything I've ever heard. Kingdom Valley is another highlight, with the return of the violin mixed with a ton of percussion instruments like shakers. It creates a feeling of energy, which used to exist in the castle, while also offering a sense of gloom, representing the tragedy occurring 10 years prior. I don't even know where to begin to explain tracks like Aquatic Bass. I will say there is plenty of bass present, and it offers a somber tone, as this is ultimately where Iblis and Mephiles were unleashed on the world. From beginning to end, Sonic 06's soundtrack is a masterclass in what a video game soundtrack should be. The instrument selections, compositions, and genres perfectly encapsulate the physical space which they represent, but also capture the mood each location represents in the overall story arc. It is stunning and mandatory listening for all music fans. As I played through Sonic 06, I couldn't help but find myself feeling a strange sense of deja vu. Many parts of the game felt very familiar, to put it lightly. So, in between my two playthroughs of Sonic 06, I decided to revisit the Sonic campaign from the first adventure game. And those feelings were not unfounded. At times, Sonic 06 is like a reimagining of Sonic's first true 3D adventure, with other references thrown in. Wave Ocean is an obvious nod to Emerald Coast, complete with a whale chase. Dusty Desert is similar to Hidden Base. White Acropolis features snowboarding, complete with a boulder chase, just like Ice Cap. Flame Core features lava, like Red Mountain. Radical Train is awfully similar to Rail Canyon. Radical Jungle is much like Green Forest. Kingdom Valley gives off Lost World vibes, and Aquatic Bass reminded me of Final Egg. The only level that didn't feel like an homage to past games was Crisis City. It wasn't just the level themes either. Jump panels are a prominent gimmick in Sonic 06, but in Sonic Adventure there is a visual cue to the presence. Sonic Team has a weird thing for tornadoes as well, and I can't understand why character battles continue to be a presence in these games, when they rarely amount to anything more than spamming attacks. Even the super speed sections had been done before in Radical Highway. Only in Radical Highway the player didn't die when running into something. Imagine that. Even the egg carrier is lifted from the adventure games. In some ways it makes me feel like Sonic Team simply ran out of ideas. Instead of creating new worlds to play through, they went back to the well in an attempt to recreate their past success. I hope this isn't true, but at times the similarities are hard to ignore. What Sonic Team failed to realize is fans love the adventure games despite the character battles, hub worlds, large character rosters, and goofy stories, not because of them. The failure to realize what was truly enjoyed by the fans and what fans simply tolerated made for some strange game decisions, and has made Sonic 06 a very bloated game. So, with all of that out of the way, we come to the final leg of this journey. Let me start by saying Sonic the Hedgehog 2006 is not the worst game I've ever played. It isn't even the worst Sonic game released in 2006 for that matter. Many of the game's issues are vastly overstated. The game is glitchy for sure, but during normal gameplay, few of these will ever be experienced unless one seeks them out. I often hear complaints about the camera too, but outside of the boss fights, the camera feels about the same as every other 3D platformer out there. It doesn't get stuck on things, but can be less than desirable in tight quarters. But again, these moments are few and far between. Even the story isn't what I would consider terrible. It's about as nonsensical as the games preceding it. Eggman is constantly capturing the princess because he wants the flames of disaster inside her. Little does Eggman know, all he has to do is make Elise cry, which will release the flames. Mephiles also wants to release the flames so he can combine with it to form Solaris, the sun god of Soliana. This isn't all that different than Chaos, the god of destruction. In Sonic 06, the conflict all began 10 years prior to the present, when Solaris was just the Flame of Hope. However, after an experiment goes bad, the Flame of Hope is split into Mephiles and Iblis. Later in the game, Silver and Shadow travel back in time to try and clean up the disaster. Mephiles is captured with the Scepter of Darkness, while Iblis is bound with Elisa's soul. It's goofy for sure, but even with the 3 different time periods, the story is easy enough to follow. That isn't to say the story is good, it is most definitely poor. The main culprit is, of course, the relationship between Sonic and Elise. They appear to fall in love. This itself isn't horrible, and one could compare it to, say, Beauty and the Beast. The problem is the connection is never developed. There is literally just a single scene where they share a moment together. Sonic tells her to raise her head and run. I'm sorry, but I don't find this premise very convincing. The rest of the cutscenes are just Elise getting captured over and over again. Other than this awkward running segment, there is no bonding between these two characters whatsoever. Therefore, unlike Beauty and the Beast, these brief encounters just end up being cringy instead of heartwarming. Finally, the time travel is never utilized all that well. The characters always seem to make poor decisions when it comes to what place and time they wish to travel. Times and locations chosen rarely resolve the root issue, and instead only deal with the symptoms of the problem. If one is actually invested in the story, this can be annoying. Moving on are those pesky hub worlds. Generally speaking, these are a waste of time. I suspect the original intent was for the town missions to teach the player new skills in a non-tutorialized way. The problem is, platformers as a genre are not complex. There is no leveling up, characters don't need to be healed, there is no magic to learn or history to glean. Instead, the hub worlds are sparsely filled areas where little is accomplished. To be fair, the light chip is something used for the remainder of the game, so I guess this part sort of makes sense. But the slide kick upgrade is used for a single town mission, and is never required anywhere else. Same goes for the bounce bracelet. It is used to reach the entrance of Radical Train. The action stage itself requires its use just once, and that's it. This skill is never needed again. The upgrade just feels half-baked. If the town missions actually taught new skills which were then required for progression in a meaningful way, they wouldn't be so offensive, but most town missions are combat-focused, making them tedious and repetitive as the player already learned how to use the homing attack in the first level. In a better game, each new purchase and skill would build on each other, with levels requiring their mastery for success or boss battles needing the upgraded moveset, but that doesn't happen in Sonic 06. Other than this one jump, the skills the player starts with are all that is needed for each and every level and each and every boss. This lack of progression and growth is why the hub worlds and town missions are so poor. They are literally padding, adding nothing to the adventure. Shadow and Silver aren't much better. Shadow needs to purchase the air chip to perform the light dash, and blue memory shard, which I assume lets him smash through these rocks. As you can probably guess, I don't recall Shadow ever needing to smash through something again. In fact, none of his extra attacks are ever needed. I did find the Chaos Spear handy for stopping these giant worms from moving, but the Chaos Snap, which sometimes warps Shadow along enemies and sometimes doesn't, is pointless. Again, the hub worlds and town missions don't teach the player anything, making them feel like time wasters. It's baffling too, as these barren streets would have been the perfect area to introduce the player to the mechanics of the buggy, hovercraft, glider, and bike, but alas, the opportunity was wasted. I will say I did find Silver the most interesting character to play as. Using his telekinesis powers, the player can raise blocks into the air, creating shortcuts and alternate routes through some of the levels. This means that on my second playthrough, I was learning new things, and I'm sure there are far more opportunities for abuse, leading to some semblance of replay value. Now, I do understand Sonic 06 had a troubled development. Not only did Sega want this title out in 2006 for Sonic's 15th anniversary, causing the game to be rushed from the start, Yuji Naka left Sega during the game's development, and Sonic Team was splintered so work could begin on Sonic and the Secret Rings. The deck was certainly stacked against the team, and I feel for them, but I won't be offering any sympathy points. The levels are pedestrian at best. As noted earlier, the upgrades offered to each character are rarely utilized in the levels. This means the first stage, Wave Ocean, doesn't play differently than the final stage, Flame Core. About the only thing changing is the amount of enemies. While I applaud the developers for attempting to increase the difficulty, simply adding more enemies is hardly progression. This is most noticeable with Shadow's episode. The problem can be summed up with this loading screen. Shadow's most effective attack combo is mashing the A button 7 times. In Shadow's final levels, one will be mashing the A button over and over, defeating all of the enemies in a room in order to unlock a door. As these levels near the 10-minute mark and beyond, it becomes incredibly repetitive, void of any strategy. The same goes for Silver. Early on in the adventure, Silver needs to guide this ball into a pit to unlock the level's exit, offering a non-scripted use for his telekinetic powers. But other than occasionally smashing down walls, his powers are strictly used for combat. There is little strategy necessary for these battles, and like Shadow, his levels start to feel long and repetitive. Moving along, let's get back to the story. Sonic's episode is perhaps the least important. Sonic spends nearly his entire episode failing at every task provided. He gets owned by Silver. Eggman is constantly outsmarting him, and because he is always distracted by Eggman, he never helps in resolving the conflict with Mephiles or Iblis. Shadow and Silver, on the other hand, are the real stars of the show here. Mephiles spends his time trying to recruit Shadow. According to Mephiles, humanity will eventually eventually turn on him. Shadow is too wise to simply take Mephiles' word for it though, and Shadow decides to keep his promise to Maria and protect humanity regardless of the alleged consequence. Silver is far less logical. He basically believes what anyone tells him, which sends him on a path to murder Sonic. Thankfully, Shadow saves the day here and Silver realizes the error of his ways. After returning to the future, Silver tries to capture Iblis using the power of the Chaos Emeralds, but ultimately fails. As he does not have a royal soul, he cannot act as a vessel. Blaze then attempts to act as the vessel, but seems to die trying. The cutscene is not clear to me, and is also how Silver's episode ends. Shadow doesn't experience any luck with Mephiles either. After his final battle, Mephiles continues to taunt him, forcing Shadow to make an escape rather than fight on. So to recap, Sonic accomplishes nothing, Silver gets his best friend killed trying to contain Iblis, and Shadow learns he cannot defeat Mephiles. This leads us to the final episode. In the present time, Mephiles spears Sonic the Hedgehog, presumably killing him, causing Elise to cry. This allows Iblis, the Flames of Disaster, to escape and Mephiles to join with it and resurrect Solaris, the sun god of Soliana. This creates a spatial distortion. Thankfully, all of the characters end up in the same location, so a plan can be devised. First, Elise determines Sonic is not dead. The gang then determines if Elise's soul could be a vessel for Iblis, then she should be able to resurrect Sonic's soul. Of course, this wouldn't be possible without the 7 Chaos Emeralds. An epic end-of-the-world level then begins. Each of the 7 remaining characters travels through a mini-level with an end goal being a Chaos Emerald. These are all repeated sections of previous levels, though made trickier by the collapsing time-space. This is signified by the purplish level color, as well as these miniature black hole things. With the 7 Chaos Emeralds collected, Elise is able to resurrect Sonic with a prayer and a kiss. With Sonic alive, the 3 heroes go super and take on Solaris. Like most Sonic games since Sonic Adventure 2, the final fight is a flying battle. The player is tasked with rotating between each character to determine who can actually dish out damage. Switching characters also allows the idle character to regain rings, as the fight will be over if the ring count drops to 0. After enough attacks, Solaris will transform into its final form and the battle resumes. 8 minutes later and Solaris is defeated. Like I said, despite the time travel in multiple episodes, the story isn't hard to follow. The plot is filled with holes for sure, but functions at a basic level. So, is Sonic 06 really among the worst video games of all time? The answer is of course no. I'm sure it will always carry a reputation of being among the worst, much like E.T., but if one looks at the game objectively, Sonic's 06 reputation will always be worse than the game actually is. Don't get me wrong though, Sonic the Hedgehog 2006 is a bad game, but not for the reasons often cited. Eggman's realistic appearance is odd, Sonic's relationship with Elise is not authentic, the game features glitches, the camera is bad during boss fights, the super speed sections are annoying, and 2 of the main characters are unlikable. These are all genuine and understandably problems for sure, but a Sonic game should be able to overcome these issues. What makes Sonic the Hedgehog 2006 a bad game are its gameplay and design issues. At its core, a platformer is about platforming, and Sonic 06 fails in this regard. The inability to slow inertia while in the air is a critical flaw and makes the game feel stiff and unresponsive from beginning to end. The problems with both inertia and momentum don't end with the jumping either. The gravity is rarely present, with inclines or declines not affecting a character's speed at all. This creates some baffling moments where Sonic is standing on the sides of crates or reacting unexpectedly to obstacles. The lack of control is at times baffling, from the inability to alter mid-air direction during the super speed sections to the inability to jump out of a spin dash or slide. The player is often left unable to perform the action they wish to do, which should not happen in a platformer. The level structures are also bland, with concepts repeated from beginning to end. When new obstacles are introduced, they are sloppily implemented. One has to wait for the flower to light up before jumping off a vine, for example. This would make sense if the flower lit up during the peak of the swing, but it doesn't, instead happening in the middle, which is hard to anticipate. Speed pads are also poorly placed, causing the characters to plow into walls or other obstructions, dragging down the pace and flow of the action stages. In fact, Sonic 06 is seriously lacking in flow. Almost everything brings the characters to a standstill, including the homing attack. This constant break in the action further slogs down the pace of the game, and when the game does start getting into a nice groove, there is a load screen. The hub worlds are vast, empty spaces serving as nothing but padding between the action stages. The guards and people seem disinterested in the chaos happening around them, so why should the player care? The town missions are not teaching the player skills needed for future segments of the game, so what is the point? Fighting through an endless horde of enemies offers no tangible reward. At least Sonic Adventure 1 and 2 had a Chow Garden, giving a reward for the shallow combat. Sonic the Hedgehog 2006 contains no real reward system at all. Instead, the game feels like a giant waste of time. Sonic 06 contains few frustrating moments, which I can appreciate, but also features almost zero reward either. The game functions in a basic sense, but the gameplay rarely provides any sort of engagement. There is little challenge and little reward for sitting through this 12-hour endeavor. At times, it feels more like a job than a piece of entertainment. Curiously, the game seems aware of this and ends in the most ironic way possible. After defeating Solaris, Sonic and Elise are taken back in time to when Solaris was just the flame of hope, before the people of Soliana started experimenting on it as a power source or means of time travel. In this moment, Elise finally grows a pair and makes an important decision. If she blows out the flame, it can never be split into Iblis and Mephiles, and none of the events in the game will ever happen. She of course blows out the flame, which perfectly encapsulates my feelings on Sonic 06. From beginning to end, nothing of importance ever happens, and it would probably be better if it never existed at all.